Hello all, and welcome to episode 1 of the Prog Nerd Reviews. Episode 1 today is Ommadawn by Oldfield. Now, for all the people who are new to my channel, my name's Neve, I'm 19 and I'm absolutely obsessed with prog, especially ELP. And this is a new series that I'm starting. Every Wednesday I'm going to be reviewing one album and giving my opinions, all that kind of stuff. So today I'm starting with Ommadawn by Oldfield, which is an album that was released after Tubular Bells. All of you probably know Tubular Bells. It's a very, very iconic album cover and piece of music. It was used in The Exorcist, and it also helped Richard Branson's career explode into what it is today. So I'm just gonna get on with it. I have got a notebook. Recently I just got this notebook to write down a lot of stuff. So this is all the list of albums that I've got so far. I've used a lot of kind of top prog albums lists that have been floating around on YouTube. I've just kind of listed the ones that I have and haven't heard of. I've kind of meshed them all into one list. Some of them will be albums I've heard before, some will be albums that I've never heard of, some will be that I've heard of but not listened to. You know, it's going to be a nice big variety, but it's all going to be under the prog umbrella. I'm hopefully going to be reviewing newer prog bands and prog bands that didn't really get the mainstream attention that they should have deserved. And today we're starting with one of those kind of albums, an album that didn't really get to the appraisal that I think it should have gotten. So I went all out. So I re-listened to Ommadawn yesterday night and wrote down everything about the album that I could possibly think of while I was listening to it. So as you guys know, this album is just two tracks. So you got Ommadawn Part 1 and then you got Ommadawn / On Horseback. It is an album I have listened to before. It is an album I love very, very much. So it was a case of just re-listening to it and picking up on stuff that I didn't pick up on while listening to it just casually. So I really went in depth when I listened to this because I wanted to give the best possible review and my best possible outlook on the album. So let's start. Do I own it on vinyl? Yes, I do. That is going to be the first question that I am going to answer at the beginning of every video. I'm going to say, well, yes, I do own the album, so here it is. This particular copy is not a reissue, it's just a old pressing, and here we go. And for those who haven't heard of it, again, as I said, it's the same brains behind Tubular Bells. So I wrote a lot for my little review here, and I'm gonna kind of try and sum it up as well as I can. So yeah, when was this album released? This album was released in 1975, so very close to when prog started to eventually die out. I don't consider this album fully prog. I kind of consider it more of a folky world music with slight prog twangs attached to it. It's not enough to be considered prog, in my opinion, but I'm going to be reviewing it anyway, because as I said, it has got some progressive rock aspects, as did a lot of the music around the time, 1975. You know, prog was kind of big at that point, so people were kind of taking ideas from all these different prog bands and putting it into their own music, but this is very, very different atmosphere to Tubular Bells, because Tubular Bells is more kind of like atmospheric, very kind of spooky in a way. Obviously it was used in a horror film. But this one is more folky, more kind of upbeat, definitely more interesting in my opinion. So as I said, released in 1975. Artist Oldfield, and there are 2 tracks on this album. As I said, one of them is 19 minutes and 23 seconds, which is side 1. Side 2 is part 2, On Horseback, which is 17 minutes roughly. So I'm just going to break down the tracks, both of them. I had a lot to say about both tracks because I'm an aspiring producer and I did music technology for 2 years of my life so far. So I'm pretty good at analysing, picking out things, and yeah, so I'm just gonna get on with it because there's not a lot of daylight left and I want to film this video while there's daylight. So let's start. So the first track, probably my personal favourite side of the album. So it starts off with some very nice vocals from like a background choir, along with a lot of overdubbed guitar tracks, which work very well, acoustic and electric. And you know, there's little spaces are between these kind of sections of music where there's a bass guitar, which works very well. I like the tone, I love the tone of the bass guitar, and I love the way it's played. I love it's kind of bouncy as well as being atmospheric, working very well alongside the kind of atmosphere of the album that Oldfield's trying to portray to us all. Around the 4-minute mark of the track, that's when percussion and percussive instruments come in, and nothing too, you know, outrageous, nothing, you know, odd time signatures or anything. Just very, very nicely kind of done percussion that works well with the songs, very nice grooves. Not a drum kit as per se, more like a full drum kit, more of like a snare and hi-hat kind of thing. So as I said, this album is very much not progressive rock, but I'm going to include it anyway because it's progressive in its own way, as well as people will say, well, Sgt. Pepper's isn't prog rock, but it's progressive. As I said, more of a folky aspect. So the instruments used I find very interesting because it's not, you know, just, you know, your guitars, your bass, your drums, etc. You've also got different types of drums. You've got a pipe, like some form of pipe that's played around the kind of 6-minute mark of the song. It makes it more of like a fun and kind of interesting song. It's definitely something I've never heard before in music. As I'm young, I haven't listened to a lot of kind of folky music, but I think this is a very good introduction to it personally for someone who wants to kind of try and get into that kind of atmosphere. I think that the percussion sections with the pipe also work very nicely together, and very, very nice. I love the harp. It's a very, very beautiful instrument, and I think that this, when this was played during this track, it was very, very beautifully done. I loved it. I know this track quite well, so every time it kind of comes in, I always have that kind of, I get like butterflies almost, because this is so incredibly done. The atmosphere that I kind of got from this track was like walking through a field in the Irish countryside. As someone who's actually of Irish descent, this kind of makes me feel at home. It makes me feel nostalgic in a way. It makes me feel very comforted. I believe that Mike Oldfield's also a very underrated guitar. I mean, the guitar work in this track is absolutely phenomenal, and something that, you know, I've never heard before. Nothing that I've heard, you know, pre-1975. Near the end of the song, well, not more like middle to end, there is obviously a vocal section. The vocals are not in English, they're in Gaelic, which is the Irish language. And what I find interesting upon researching a bit more about this particular album and this track and all that, is that Oldfield actually asked a Irish songwriter, the name's kind of left my head, but I'll pop it up there, to write down the first things that kind of came into her head when she was asked to write these lyrics. So they actually translate into "Daddy's in bed, the cat's drinking milk, I'm an idiot, and I'm laughing," which made me laugh actually, because the language that it's in makes it sound like it'd be something kind of interesting, like very, you know, whimsical almost, but the fact that it's just a little bit of nonsense makes me laugh quite a lot, and I think that's very, very smart in a way, because it's like, well, this sounds very pretty, but the actual meaning is a load of nonsense. As I said, it doesn't matter. I think the Gaelic language sounds very nice, along with the kind of rhythm that the drums are giving off, as well as the kind of world instruments. This piece definitely combines African rhythms with the kind of drum beats, drum patterns, with the Irish folk music aspect, with the harps and the pipes and all that. And this is definitely a very good album opener, and the track ends with the drums fading out. This is probably my favourite side of the album, because probably the vocals, I think that they're very, very beautiful, and I think that the music works very well alongside it. So onto the second side of the album, which is Ommadawn Part 2, Stroke on Horseback. This is one that I was less familiar with, but gave a very, very detailed listen into. So it opens with very engaging guitar work, and it's obviously a load of overdubbing. As I said, you know, there's different parts in the same place, if that makes sense. If you are familiar with what overdubbing is, if you're, you know, into learning about production and all that kind of stuff, overdubbing is, you know, you have a track and you're recording multiple tracks on top of that track, which is overdubbing. And I think the way that he's used it is very good. It's not messy, it's not clunky, it's very, just right. It sits very well with me. There's not too much and there's not too little, so it's not bland, but it's not in your face. As a bass guitarist, I think the bass work on this track and the album as a whole is very, very well done. The tone is very lovely. I love that tone. Hopefully maybe I can try and get that tone at some point. Works very nicely alongside the guitar. It's almost used as like a second lead, which I love about prog, is that the bass guitar can take a second lead, especially in, you know, bands like Yes and ELP, Genesis, but that's for another video. Around the 3.5 minute part there is bells, which I think could be tubular bells, but it could be wrong, and they're it's very atmospheric, but it's almost haunting. It reminds me of the first Black Sabbath song on the Black Sabbath album, the actual track Black Sabbath. It's very haunting, but very, very well done, and it really creates an atmosphere. I found myself thinking throughout this track, particularly, how come this didn't receive the kind of praise that Tubular Bells got, and I think I'll pick up more on that at the end, but I definitely thought that throughout listening to this album. So there's an acoustic part around the 6 minute mark, which almost quite literally brought me to tears, because I was just sitting in my room, pair of headphones on, with, you know, playing the vinyl, and it almost brought me to tears, because this is just incredible. I've heard nothing like this before. And as I said, there's a lot of folk influence throughout this album and throughout this song. Quite Celtic as well as Irish as well. Feels like I felt like when I closed my eyes a bit, you know, I was like, I'm currently in Ireland right now, and I'm listening to this while I'm walking through a field. And the tone after around the 10 minute mark starts to change, which I find interesting as well, because you've got this kind of build up of atmosphere, you know, with the bells and the acoustic section, and suddenly, you know, change in tempo, and it becomes more upbeat, also almost medievally in a way, which is what prog kind of is. It's almost quite medievally in a way. I get that vibe from things like Genesis, but it's, you know, it's unique, and I love that. And the kind of rhythms, the notes, the patterns, all that stuff is very reminiscent of prog rock, as I said. Around 14 minutes there's a spoken word section alongside some vocals, and that really made me think of Lord of the Rings for some reason, because it reminded me of kind of the medievally kind of aspect, the mythical aspect, you know, very strange but well-working lyrics, and it's like almost like a campfire song, you know, and I love that. And very noteworthy of the acoustic part in that as well, is very, very, very good. Towards the end of the song there's like harmonies sung by children, and this is where I start to think, well, did you really need to include that? Because I think it's all right, but it does sound a little bit messy to me personally. I still think it could have worked, but personally I think it could have been better without. Definitely added a bit more of a kind of rocky aspect to the, not rocky as in like imbalanced, but I thought that it still worked very well. So to sum up my own opinions of the album, I've just been ranting about what I heard. I've heard this album before, as I said. I've heard this album a few times, and I love it. It's probably one of my favourite albums. I've never really listened to it in this much detail before, but it's one of my favourite albums at the moment. Yeah, I hadn't listened to that album before in that much detail, but I really love the use of instruments on this album, the use of different types of instruments as well. That's what I loved about Tubular Bells as well, the amount of instruments, and there's only one kind of big mastermind behind it, which is Mike Oldfield himself. I think he's an incredible musician, you know, multi-instrumentalist as well, and can play all these instruments to a very high standard. So there's a lighting change because I'm adding in something now while I'm editing. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, I questioned, well, why did this album not receive as much praise as Tubular Bells? And I think that when you have an album that ends up being that big in that kind of short amount of time, like Tubular Bells was, obviously used in films, you tend to just kind of think, well, that's what this person's known for. Yeah, I'm just not gonna carry on listening because he made this, and I don't want to listen to any more because I'm scared or I'm worried that it's not going to be as good as Tubular Bells, which isn't exactly the right way to approach something. You know, I heard Tubular Bells for the first time and I thought, well, I want to check out what else this guy has to offer musically, and I think that this album should have definitely gotten a lot more praise because of how different it is to Tubular Bells, you know, a different direction completely, and I think it works. I think that making an album that has two different vibes completely is progress, that's development. I love it. And, you know, something as atmospheric, spooky as Tubular Bells, and then onto something more folky, more Celtic, more kind of upbeat. It's development, and I think that more people should know about this album. I think that if you haven't heard it and you know of Mike Oldfield, then listen to his other work. Things like Hergest Ridge are also very good, not just Tubular Bells, you know, there is other stuff for you to listen to. I think that this is definitely one of his finest moments. My favourite track, as I said, was the first side, and I'd overall give it about an 8 out of 10. I don't give 10s very sparingly. The marks that were lost were for that kind of ending of the second half of the album, the kind of added vocal harmonies. I just didn't think that that was that good, but 8 out of 10 is a good score. That concludes my first review. Again, this is the first album I've ever reviewed, and I think I did alright. I did ramble on quite a lot, but I'm going to leave that in for the sake of the video. And next Wednesday will be a new review. Next week I will be reviewing a Rush album. Not going to tell you which one, but it's a Rush one, and you can look forward to that. There is going to be another video tomorrow, and I hope you guys enjoyed. See you tomorrow. Bye.